Hi, everybody. A number of you have asked me, where can I find the lesson that you did, BJ, 2 weeks ago from the Beloved and Dignified Conference? So I'm making that available to you today. I hope that it really helps you as you make it through your struggles of pain, whatever that might be. The thing I loved most about this conference is they did not want a lesson so much as speak as though you're speaking to a sister who is a friend trying to get through hard times. So be blessed.
I'm so honored that God tapped me to be a part of this whole thing. I am just so honored. And just let me say this, I'm just going to go off script a little bit. You are all my sheroes. You guys are so incredible. And I want to point that out because I know that when we're going through hard times, when we're suffering, when we're in pain, the last thing you think is that you're doing well spiritually. But let me tell you, hearing what I'm hearing today and yesterday, I bow down to everybody that is still standing. It just shows that we are incredible women of God. And I know that God and the angels in heaven are all rejoicing. They're cheering, they're screaming, they're rejoicing about what's going on this weekend. So anyway, to Sonia, thank you so much for interpreting. I apologize in advance. I am a girl from the hood. So I don't know if you have translation for y'all or speak it, girl. I don't know, but we'll find out as we go through it. We've heard so much deep pain and suffering over the last couple of days. My intent, my prayer is to be able to lift this thing up just a little bit. Obviously, I'm going to share my own journey, which is pretty excruciating as well. But then, girls, we serve a God that's so incredible, so powerfully incredible that he works through all of the junk and the garbage that we've gone through. So I wanted to talk about navigating transition. Life really is just a series of transitions. Honestly, if you think about it, I deliberately wore my gray hair today. Why? I'm transitioning my hair. I am transitioning my hair powerfully, boldly. What that means is I decided to make the gray grayer and let's just see what happens. As opposed to slowly, timidly tiptoeing in, I just went, you know what, let's go for it. But I say that because even that transition brings up stuff. I kept going through, okay, do I do this? Do I not? What would people think? What would people say? I had so many feelings going on. And then once you get over your own stuff, you have somebody else go, oh, what are you doing? Oh, don't do that. Why don't you dye your hair? I was like, you know what? Shut up. I'm sure nobody else has probably said that in their classes this weekend, but sometimes we just have to do this and go, shut up, stop the noise. So as we navigate this transition, I really want to talk about my journey and what God has been teaching me and what God has done with me. I work with, I'll throw this out there, I always do, I work with the homeless here in Reno. I work with the students who live in their cars, they live in the shelters, they live under the bridges. They are what we call the invisible people. They're there, but they're the ones we turn our eyes away from. We don't really want to see them because it brings up stuff for us. But these kids still need to go to school. These kids still need to be fed. They still need to be cared for. And a lot of my journey that God has allowed me to travel through has led me here. And as we go through it, I'll point out some of the things I start to see God do. I think my God knows that BJ has to understand. I'm a deep thinker. So I have to understand, God, why am I going through this? If you can show me the why, I'm okay with it. But I need to know something. And the experience of just finding that through line has been incredible. So I take you back to when I was younger. And I always mention this for those who look like me, you'll understand. I'll never forget when my beautiful chocolate grandma, round hips, thick lips, just like mine, looked at 9-year-old me and said, it's a good thing she's talented because she sure is ugly. And my heart went whoosh. And that began a journey of hiding who I am. Because when I looked in the mirror, I saw this deep, dark chocolate girl that was considered ugly because of the color of her skin. I saw a girl whose hips were round and whose lips were full that didn't deserve to be seen. Instead, she should be in the background. That began an 8-year journey in bulimia, in anorexia. So I look at that and I go, whoa, the seeds that we plant and what it does to us and how it disrupts what God really wants from us. That's the BJ that began to travel through life. Then when I hit 11, I had this near kidnapping abduction take place, in which God gifted me with the gift of speed. And I was attacked by this man who attempted to pull me into his car. But because I am so fast, BJ was able to run and get away. However, my friend was not. I remember running home, 11-year-old me, hiding in the bathtub, pulling the drapes, the curtains, and just shivering because of what had transpired. It wasn't until the next day that I found out that my friend had been kidnapped. She had been raped and she had been murdered. BJ at that time lost her voice. I literally stopped talking. For a year and a half, they called it selective muteness. I said nothing. At school, I wrote letters. Teacher would ask something, I would write. I was afraid to speak. I was so terrified. Unfortunately, that's the girl who traveled through life. I trusted no one. I was afraid that my voice somehow was going to get me hurt. So instead of speaking, I chose to be silent. I look at, there's a beautiful song out there right now called Oceans. Spirit, lead me to where my trust is without borders. That's where God has been working me literally from the age of 9 all the way up to now 64. God has been leading me to a place where my trust is without borders. I look at the kids that I work with and I go, God, how did I get here? I don't have the qualifications to be working here. How did I get here? He had me go back and reflect on all that we went through together. I look at the BJ that shut down. I look at the BJ when she lost her first child, who simply pushed through and kept going. It was the thing to do because I was in ministry. I look at the BJ who's in my first marriage was very abused, but I didn't know what to do or say, so I just kept going. I remember the BJ coming to a service. It was one of those few times, it was a horrible night before, so I actually came in shades, which I never did. And I just sat there. It took everything for me just to be there that day. But I remember the person turning around and saying, oh, what are you going to do now? Just sit here and feel sorry for yourself? And my heart. BJ inside always had something to say, but BJ outside said nothing. That's where all of my trouble started to come together, because God was trying to help me find my voice again. I look at everything that God allowed me to do. I look at my life kind of like a snake shedding its skin. A snake bumps up against hard surfaces over and over and over again in order to shed its skin. And I was like, God, why are you letting me go through so much hard stuff? I don't understand. Now I can look at it and see he's trying to get me to shed my skin, to let go. Trust me, BJ. But my trust still had borders. I wasn't ready to go there, God. We're not going to do that. There's a saying in The Incredibles too. I mentioned this to my women the other night. When Elastic Girl, the mom, she went, oh, when she found out the kids had powers, oh, but they're just children. And he says, yes, they're children, but they're children with power. Now, whether or not they use it is up to them. God was trying to show me that I had power, but whether or not I used it was going to be up to me. He kept putting me in situations that forced me to speak, but I didn't. I kept screaming out to God, but I wasn't screaming out to anyone else. And inside, I was getting bitter. I was getting angry. I was frustrated. And God was allowing me to. I didn't understand that. God, why are you doing this? I took all of my hurt and all my pain and I turned it to God. I was like, I don't get you. You say you love me, but you keep pushing me into things I don't want to be in. I remember going to, well, I didn't go. The one time BJ didn't go to a leaders meeting, I had just gotten all the way up to here. I had nothing left. I don't know about y'all, if you've ever been there, but when the pain is so intense and it's prolonged for such a long period of time that you feel like, God, whew, if one more person comes up and say one more thing, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose my religion. That's how I felt. So here I was for the first time in, let's say, 20 years of leadership. I couldn't do this one. I couldn't do it. I said, God, you know I love you, but I think BJ's going to have to tap out. And God was like, no. I said, no, I'm tapping out. I think it's time. I think it's time to tap out. Then God put it on my heart to go and say goodbye to my one friend. Now, I don't have a whole lot of friends. Jennifer is one of my few. No, I didn't have a lot of friends, but I had one that I just had to go and say goodbye to. And she happened to be in that meeting. I remember going and I'm standing outside. The door's open, so I'm just standing out on the porch. She looks over and she goes, oh, BJ, come on in. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Shh, I'll wait till you're done. She said, no, come on in. BJ, the good girl that she is, came in reluctantly. And I sit there and go, I'll just wait until you're done. Sat there for probably about 5 more minutes. So they're finishing up. And of course, the usual, everybody, let's circle up and let's pray. And I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? And she's like, BJ, come pray with us. I'm like, no. I have these arguments. I have these real talks with God. That's what I call them. I'm like, God, why? Why do you have me here when you know I said I'm tapping out? She said, BJ, why don't you come on? Let's pray. The good girl fell in line because that's what she always does. And I stood there waiting. And then out of nowhere, she says, BJ, why don't you pray? I swear, it felt like I was silent for 5 minutes, just trying to breathe and find the words. And it's one of those few times that nobody jumped in to save me. You know how sometimes people go, well, I'll pray. That's okay, sis. No one jumped in. Everybody just simply remained silent. And then finally, after what felt like an eternity, all I could say, all I could whisper was, God, help me. And everybody said, amen. It was one of those moments that God began to work. The throat was so tight. I felt like there was a sock in my throat and I couldn't get the words out. And God began to show me in that moment, BJ, there's a process that I'm putting you through. And if you trust me, we're going somewhere together. That helped me to realize, ladies, that all the pain, all the suffering, everything I've heard this weekend, there is a process of navigating these transitions. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It does not take away the pain, but it shows me that God is in control as I move forward. I began to dig into scriptures. That's what I do when I'm really stuck. I love the word of God. I dig deep. I'm like, God, show me something. And he began to show me these 3 words in particular: preparation, platform, purpose. Preparation, BJ, platform, purpose. And I started to look at different characters in the scripture. I looked at Joseph. And Joseph had, 20, 30 years of preparation, meaning time in which he had to endure and struggle through a lot of garbage before he finally hit the platform. The platform is that period of time when you become kind of an influencer. All of a sudden, I am somebody. I have a message to tell. I have the word of God in my throat. Before he finally reached purpose, which was to save his family's life. I followed that all the way through. I looked at Moses and I saw the same thing. I looked at Elijah, I saw the same thing. And I went, okay, God, you're showing me something. I looked at Jesus, who have been on the face of this earth as we know it for 33 years, but 30 of those years was preparation. Jesus had 30 years of preparation, 3 years of platform. That's when everybody wanted Jesus. Oh, Jesus, do that. Oh, Jesus. 3 years and 3 hours of purpose. 30 years to get him prepared for those 3 hours. God, I had to look at my life and I said, BJ, all of what you're going through, there is a reason. Nothing God does is ever wasted. So I began to look at that young girl and all of what she went through. And then it started to kind of make sense. Doesn't mean I was happy. I still wasn't happy. I still had an attitude towards God, but at least it started to make sense. God, you're taking me somewhere. If I can just trust your hand, you're going to take me somewhere. But every time a hit would come, I'd pull back. It's that same girl who took off running and hid in the bathtub and pull the. Every time a hit would come, I'd go running because I was trying so desperately to protect myself. And God was saying, no, baby girl, this is not how we're going to do it. You can keep doing that, but I'm going to keep pulling you back out. And I was mad about it. I think sometimes, ladies, we are afraid. We're too Christian. We're too Christian to say, God, I'm mad at you. God, I don't understand you. God, but he already knows it. He needed BJ to get so full that she couldn't hold it anymore. I kept going. BJ is a pretty strong woman. I didn't know that, but it's funny how other people know it. My friend Cherie said, she introduced me once and she called me, she said, you're a spiritual gangster. I was like, what? And then I was talking to Kathy, the moderator, and she said, you're dogged. I was like, what? Because other people see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. They saw a fighter. I saw a scared little girl. It took a long time for the fighter in me and the scared little girl to finally come together. Cindy Marsh, I don't even, God can use people in our lives, and it's so incredible. Cindy Marsh passed through my life decades ago. And she may have been in my ministry or passed through my ministry from, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. To this day, if I was standing next to her, I would not know who she is. I don't know what she looks like, but I remember what she said because God spoke through her to me. She said, BJ, you are a survivor. She said, your world has exploded so many times around you, but because you are a survivor, you refuse to go down. You grab all your pieces and you force them back together and you just keep on going. She said, the only problem with that is just like with a jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes you can put a piece in places that they should not be. They simply don't fit. So God keeps re-exploding your foundation. He's trying to get you to put your hands behind your back and let him put the pieces together. Whew. I was like, you know, God, that even hurts just to say it. My heart hurts. I was like, how in the world am I supposed to do that? So for another decade, I continued to do exactly that. When my world would explode, I'd grab my pieces and I'd put them back together. In church, out of church. Hurts, sufferings, pain, you name it. It all went into that same bucket. I felt used and abused in the kingdom and out of the kingdom. I felt like I was the poster child at times because I was successful by the grace of God in entertainment. Sometimes I was simply the poster child. And I felt used in entertainment and I felt used by my church. But BJ never said a word. Bitterness. Why are these people doing this to me? Why don't they see me? Why can't they? All of that, because I can have a major conversation going on in my head. I don't know about y'all. They could write a script because I'll be saying, and I said, and then they said, well, I should have. You have conversations going on, but no one knows it but me. I proceeded like that for 30 years. But God is relentless. Not because he's mad at me. I had to come to that. But because he loved me. My family went through a transition not too long ago that was just, it rocked my world. I was like, whew, it came out of nowhere. And everything was just, my world exploded. Again, it exploded. But this time, BJ had no energy. I had nothing left to pull the pieces together. When I was younger, I could grab those pieces, force them together, and keep on going. But then as I started to get older, not because physically, I just couldn't fight the fight anymore. I couldn't fake the funk, as they say. Good luck, Sonia, on that one. I just couldn't do it anymore. So I remember everything had exploded. Nothing made any sense. We found ourselves just trying to find a place to live. Ministry was shifting. We were trying to find some other place to go. I couldn't get arrested, kind of thing. It was like, no matter where you turn, everybody, the door was closing. Nope, sorry. Nope, thank you. Nope, love you. Nope. If one more person said, but I love you with the love of the Lord, I was going to slap somebody. I didn't want to hear it because I didn't feel it. Finally, I had a couple of friends who said, here, you can stay with us. So we stayed in their place upstairs, my whole family, my dog, all of us just crowded upstairs as we tried to find a safe place to land. All our clothes, everything we owned were in plastic bags. We were at the mercy of whoever had mercy on us. And I was mad. My husband dealt with it completely different, but I'll tell you honestly, sisters, I was angry. God, I have served you faithfully for 30 plus years, and I have nowhere to lay my head. And I turned it all the way to, what did I do to you to make you so angry at me? That's how I felt. I felt that he had deserted me. He had disappointed me. He had let me down. He had promised to take care of my children. I didn't know what I was going to do. How do I feed my kids? How do I tell them Mom has no answer? I remember going to government housing. I remember trying to get some insurance. I remember all these insane moves. And every time you come, obviously you had to bring a pay stub, and they would say, well, you made too much money. I'm going, but I don't make it now. How do I take care of my kids now? In that moment, I started fighting because I am a spiritual gangster. I started fighting. And I came to realize that every boxer, every good boxer, has a sparring partner. And God was my sparring partner. He was getting me ready. See, your sparring partner knows where you're weak. They don't put a sparring partner on you who isn't at least equally, or if not more so, stronger than you, because he's trying to prepare you for the next fight. I began to fight. That's when I started digging. And I started writing down everything. And everyone, my friends, kept saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because I was getting better. I was getting stronger. And I said, I don't know. I'm just writing down my quiet times. I just got to spend time with God. I'm just spending time with God. And that's when my friends say, you know what? Whatever this is that you're jotting down, this needs to be a book because something's happening. I said, I'm not a writer. I don't know nothing about no book. He said, write it down. And that became my book, Rebound, Staging a Spiritual Comeback. When I first began, however, it was called Dropped Calls. because I felt that, God, are you listening? Are you there? Do you hear me? Hello? Is this a drop call? God turned that attitude into rebound. BJ, it's time to get up. It's time to get up. You've been down long enough. He kept asking me, do you trust me? I'd go, yes, God, I trust you, but no. Do you trust me? Well, yeah, God, I trust you, but I don't have any. Shh, 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 shh. BJ, do you trust me? Ladies, I realized at that time when God asks a question, it's not an interrogation, it's an intervention. At first, I thought, God, you're interrogating me. You're antagonizing me. Why are you doing this? And then I start to realize he was staging an intervention because BJ had gone off track, because her throat was so full. I was right at the brink. Sometimes when we get up to here, it means you're right at that breaking point if you would just go to the next level. I had a choice to make. I could turn and go this way, or I could go that way. What God did when he finally planted my family here in Reno, I landed this incredible job, which I call my heart ministry of working with these kids and their families. Once I got here, I understood why the preparation was what it was. The only way I can meet these families and relate to these families the way that I now do and have to, I needed to know what it felt like not to know where I was going to sleep day after day after day. I needed to know what it felt like not to have an answer when my kids said, Mom, what's for dinner tonight? I needed to know what it felt like to have to pull clothes out of garbage bags because I didn't have any other place. Everything God puts us through is for a reason. He was preparing me for these babies that I now work with every day. And I'm going to share about one very specifically, but I'm going to wait a second because in the journey, you learn lessons. You learn things in the wilderness. One of the things that God distinctively said as I was dealing with this and I was pushing against him, let me just pause. God's tough. I don't care how tough we are. God's tougher. He can take your frustration. He can take your yelling and screaming if that's what it takes. He did with David. Guys, sometimes, I'll just say it, Christianity can be so sanitized that it can't help me in hard places. I'm just being real. Like I said, I'm a sister from the hood. If I'm fighting a fight, I want somebody who's going to get dirty and fight with me. I appreciate, the Hebrew says this and the Greeks, I appreciate that, but you better speak hood if you're coming into a fight with me. And that's what God did. He came to where BJ was. I needed to know that he was willing to get dirty with me. I needed to know that I could yell and scream and he wasn't scared of me. I needed to know that he loved me anyway. But one of the things that God really showed me and he called me to was that I needed to become his expectation. First of all, he has a process. We go through the preparation, the platform, in order to reach our purpose. But he said, but I also have an expectation while you're in the pain, while you're in the suffering, ladies, he does have an expectation. And that took me to Matthew 25. I'm just going to reference it, 14 through 30, the parable of the talents. I was like, what? It kept coming back to me. I'm going, God, I give my money. What are you? When we think of the parable of the talents, we tend to think finances. Am I a good steward of my finances? Am I giving to God in the tithe and the offering? He said, BJ, are you being a great steward of what I have given you? I was like, well, I think, no. Are you being a great steward of what I've given you? God has given us suffering. He's given us pain. Just like the 5 different talents, they're not all the same. Some of you, oh my goodness, like I said, I listened to some of these classes and I'm like, whoa, my sister, if I could take some of your pain away, I would. We don't get to choose our testimony, though. God chooses it. He knew before we were born what we were going to have to endure. But he chose us for it because he knows what we're made of. We have power, but we've got to choose to tap into it. God built us to endure. And again, I know it doesn't feel good. I know that sometimes we're literally at breaking point. Been there, done that. Sure, I'll be there again. But if we can just hold on to the fact that there's a lesson in it that's worth enduring. I think about those of us who've had children, those who've had really hard pregnancies, hard labors, but yet at the same time, you go, if I can just hold on, though, it's worth it. Sisters, if I can tell you nothing else, if we can just hold on, it is worth it. I love that. Jesse, I wish I had, this is my crown for today. That's my crown. Because it reminds me that I'm in this for a reason. I really did used to think that God was just messing with me. I'm like, why are you messing with me? Get up off of me, man. What did I do? God has a plan. He has a plan, but we've got to stay with it. We've got to trust without borders. I was saying, God, I trust you if it doesn't hurt too much. I trust you. And this is where it really got me. If it doesn't hurt my kids. That was my tapping point. Don't you hurt my babies. And when it started to affect my babies, BJ started punching. And that was God saying, BJ, put your hands down. Put your hands down, put them behind your back, and let me do this. My son has special needs. When everything fell apart and we didn't know quite where we were going to go, he was my greatest concern. Now, at that point, he was older. He was 21, 22. So he wanted to try life on his own. I think I'll be okay, Mom. If you guys move and go somewhere and go find work, I'll be okay. So I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do this. I'm like, I don't know. I remember driving, headed to my new location, and I'm just bawling because I'm going, God, who's going to take care of my baby? Who's going to take care of my baby? I didn't have anybody that I trusted because my trust had borders. I didn't know where to go. There was a time I could say, if anything happens, I want you to go to so-and-so. And we weren't in that space anymore. So I was scared. So God was tapping into BJ's deepest fear. What if God taps into your deepest fear? What do you do? Where do you go with that? I was terrified. He said, BJ, I need you to become a steward of what I've given you. Tend to what I've given to you. Are you going to simply bury it? I'm hurting. I'm suffering. I don't want to deal with anything because that's how I felt. That's how I felt. Didn't want to talk to anybody. Didn't want to see anybody. He says, you got to go. Then he showed me the blueprint. He says, yeah, I'm asking you to go through some stuff, but I'm going to also show you how to go through it. Remember God's promises. Rely on God's plan. Recognize God's provision and rest in his presence. I looked at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he did those 4 things. He remembered God's promises. He relied on his plan. He recognized provision, and he rested. He did the same with Elijah. He did the same with Moses. Again, there was a pattern. He was saying, BJ, do the same. We got 2 minutes. I got to throw my story in there about heaven. I had this little girl named Heaven, 11 years old. She'd come through all sorts of trauma, sex trafficking, and everything else. I heard her in the hallway one day screaming, I need to see Mrs. Foster. I need to see Mrs. Foster. And everybody kept saying, no, 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 you need to go to class. You need to go to class. No, I need to see Mrs. Foster. So finally I ran out there and I said, you know what? Let me talk her down. Let me see. And at this point, she was up against the wall. She just slid down the side of the wall, the back of the wall, and just started banging her head, saying, I'm stupid. I'm stupid. I'm stupid. And I took her face into my hands and I said, baby girl, you are nothing. There is nothing wrong with you. Something horrible has happened to you, but there is nothing wrong with you. You are beautiful, just as you are. She looked at me and she said, okay, Mrs. Foster. She got up and she went skipping down the hall and said, Mrs. Foster, I'll see you after school. In that moment, God had brought me full circle. BJ, this is why I needed your voice. If my voice, me reclaiming my voice was simply so this baby girl could hear that she is beautiful, then my work is done. Guys, we don't always get the victory, meaning it's not about us. I've come to the conclusion that this is his story. I'm just a bit player in it. I choose to play my role and play it well. God, what do you want from me? Whatever that suffering, that pain may be, that's my role. And I'm willing and I'm ready to do whatever it is that you want me to do. Full circle. The girl who lost her voice had regained her voice after going through all of the trauma in between. Guys, I know our time is up. I love you. Thank you again, Jennifer and company, for this conference. Amazing.
Thank you so much, BJ. Ladies, now what we'll do is we will transition into the Q&A. So place your questions in the Q&A, and as time allows, BJ will be able to respond to them. Any questions that are not addressed, we will provide you with a platform for that offline. So the first one that we can address is, how do you draw near to God when all you want to do is push him away?
How do you build trust when you feel like he has broken that trust? For me personally, it's music. I had to find something that connected me because we had been disconnected. And sitting in church and just listening to someone preach wasn't doing it. Even hearing the great singing wasn't doing it. I needed to hear God speaks very personally to me in a way that actually resonated with me. So for me personally, it was music. I know some people journal, some, people do different things. You have to find your thing. Right now, I go on dates with God. I go on excursions, I call them. God just takes me on excursions. Show me, God. Show me anything you want to show me today. Sometimes we go deep into the sea and we look at all the fish and I go, this is crazy. What made you think of that? How did you come up with that shape? God and I, we tight like that. I would say find your natural relationship with God and hang with it. Don't do someone else's relationship with God. It may not be working for you.
Thank you. Our next question will be, how do you find and build your circle of support?
That comes up every time. I there's that saying, when people show you who they are, believe them. I had to dismiss people from my circle because not everybody, no offense, means absolutely nothing. No offense against them. Not everybody can be in the battle with you. They weren't the right ones for that particular battle. God always, the cream rises to the top. Honestly, when we were in our worst, a lot of times people, when a ministry leader goes through something, people pull away from you. People think that they draw closer. They actually pull away because they just don't know what to do. And it leaves you very isolated and alone. So God allowed the right people at that time to raise up. And I went, okay, for this leg of my journey, this is my circle of support. Don't try to force it to make it something that it is not. Not everyone is meant for the journey with you.
Thank you. Our next question is, what was helpful for you to break down the borders?
I challenged God. I really did. Prove it. Prove yourself to me. You say you love me. I need to see it. Doesn't mean he changes the situation, but he shows himself in the situation. That 8 months, it was an 8-month journey in writing out that book, was me simply going in search of the hand of God. I was like, God, we're going to walk through all these painful scenarios in my life. You say you were there. Show me. That's what I did.
Our next question is, you mentioned in your message about we're too Christian or Christians is sanitized. Could you speak more to that? And what's a filter that we could perhaps individually approach it if and when we experience it? And what's, if and when we experience it, what's a way to protect our heart?
When I say that, I mean it lovingly, but I think we have become churches of disconnected Christians. And when I say sanitize, we do the Christian things, we say the Christian things, but unless we are personally connected to God, it's just that, Christian things. So when I say you've got to find your way with God, we've got to remember we have a way of worshiping. And I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. I've done it for 30 years. But at the same time, there's a diversity amongst us that speaks very specifically to that diversity. I grew up with a Black Baptist, Southern Baptist church. There are certain types of music that just moves me. Now, I love all the other music as well, but if I'm really hurting, I go from Amazing Grace to Amazing. It goes to a different space. So that's what I'm talking about. It's sanitized for me. It doesn't mean it's sanitized for someone else. But I think we have to be courageous enough to speak to whether or not it's reaching us. And if it is not, go in search of what reaches you. Don't know if that makes sense, but that's...
Yes. What are some suggestions you can provide for when we experience situations or see our friends or loved ones going through experiences and we either blame or we struggle with holding or placing blame. What would you suggest for us to sort out responsibility, if there is?
Well, you know what I had to do, because I know I talked a lot about me being angry with God, and I talked about that deliberately because I had a lot of, there's pain and suffering we bring upon ourselves, and then there's pain and suffering that we endure at the hands of other people. I've had both, but I had to get people's faces off of my pain because I couldn't get free of it. I can always blame someone for why I'm hurting. Someone did me dirty. Someone did me wrong. And there's always someone. But when I start pulling back all the layers, God is either in control of everything or he's in control of nothing. So I had to go all the way to God. You allowed this to happen. So there's no need for me to be angry or frustrated or bitter at people. That's an aside. I had to reconcile with God. I had to come to understand God's reasoning for why he was putting me through what he was putting me through. Once I reached that point, the people didn't matter anymore. It really didn't matter. I looked at Judas. He was simply the product that God chose to use. So I look at all the various hurts, people who have hurt me, people who have said things, you know what? They're products. But I see them, or I choose to see them, as products that God used to move BJ to a point where it forced her to speak. Without them, I may not have been where I am right now. So now I can look and say, thank you. Could it have been done differently? Yeah. Do I wish it had? Absolutely. But it reached the destination that it needed to reach.